She's lost control again. She's lost control. Tonight, May's Brexit deal has again been roundly defeated in the Commons, this time by 149 votes, a slight improvement on the same vote that happened in January, but still the fourth largest Commons defeat in history. Brexit is due in 17 days. We're living through extraordinary times, even if developments in Parliament can sometimes seem fairly tedious. We will also be talking tonight about Tom Watson, what he's playing at in the Labour Party. Is this the coup 2.0? And probably a bit about the future of Corbynism. For all of this, I'm joined by the one, the only Richard Seymour.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in the studio. Have you been glued to your laptop all day, or are you sort of boycotting the tittle-tattle in Westminster?
I wish I was. I wish I was boycotting Twitter and Facebook and its constant force feeding of news and opinions and constant stimulation. But no, I've been plugged in and paying attention to the sort of mediations of the parliamentary system. It's incredibly tedious. But the good news is that May's been defeated again.
Yeah, you wrote an interesting blog today, which I think started off by you saying you don't understand what Theresa May's strategy was. I think I'm supposed to give an introduction to what's happened today. Theresa May went to Strasbourg last night. She tried to get some sort of what she was going to say legally significant change to the backstop. This is, of course, what she had promised the ERG, the Brady Amendment, which we talked about on a previous show, whereby the government had said, we will support a motion in government which says we will try and get rid of the backstop and then we'll pass it through Parliament. So Theresa May was going to the EU saying, can we get rid of the backstop? They say, no, we already signed the withdrawal agreement. The whole point of a backstop is that it can't have a time limit. The whole point of a backstop is that it has to be legally binding. The backstop, of course, is the insurance policy, which means there'll never be a hard border in Ireland. The left should support it, if not May's deal, of course. But in any case, what this looks like is May trying to pretend that she'd achieved some change to the withdrawal agreement, which she clearly hadn't. So she said last night in Strasbourg that this was legally significant because the EU had basically said, we don't really want to keep you in a backstop. It literally is an insurance policy. It's not a trap. Today, her Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, said this is legally meaningless. So that was the point at which her whole strategy fell apart, but it could have been seen from a mile off. So I suppose the question is, considering this could have been seen from a mile off, what is she playing at? What's going on?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to distinguish between strategy and tactics. I think she's all tactics at the moment. I imagine that at some point she had a strategy which was to talk up her hard Brexit credentials. Remember when she was doing all that red, white and blue Brexit stuff? And to ignite the fire of the base and get people excited. And then at some point she decides, you know what, let's have a snap election. And, you know, I will win such an overwhelming majority that I'll be able to do whatever I want with Brexit. I don't have to pay any attention to the RG, you know, and obviously that didn't go very well. So she had a strategy, and since the snap election, and we remember the notoriously traumatized situation of the Tories at that conference in the year after, it's been sort of moving from traumatized tactic to tactic. And it's been a series of pretenses. If you remember, the initial deal with Chequers, you know, was a lot of sort of Brexiteers, Boris Johnson and so on, started kicking off, and so Theresa May, within, I think, 48 hours or something like that, had radically amended what she was proposing, essentially incorporating the objectives of the Brexit group, the hard Brexit, ERG. And she knew she wasn't going to get that from the European Union, but she says, no, I'll go back and fight for that, no worries. Next thing, she comes back, of course, with a deal is nothing like that, and then sets a vote, a parliamentary vote, and pretends she's going to have a vote before Christmas. And of course, in the end, she doesn't dare to have a vote because she knows she's going to lose by an overwhelming margin. So she staves it off until February, until the last possible moment, and still loses by an overwhelming margin. And we've had a series of pretenses since then. Her pretense that she was consulting with the opposition. Remember when Corbyn was wildly criticised in all the media? Why won't he talk to Theresa May? Doesn't he care about the future of the country? And within 24 hours, every single opposition leader that spoke to her saying, yeah, that was a waste of time. The union leaders were saying, she didn't give us anything. She's talking about, well, we're going to offer you workers' rights. No workers' rights. We're going to offer you investment for Leave constituencies. None of that. And now she's come back saying we've got some legally binding changes to the backstop agreement, which, of course, I mean, say what you like about Jacob Rees-Mogg and that lot. They're not idiots, or at least not that kind of idiot. So she's been, I think, hoping that by continually running down the clock, she will wear people down so much on her own side, because there's quite a lot of people who have various objections who are not the ERG, but who could probably be won over. And I just hope that despair and weariness and a fear of that nasty Mr. Corbyn in Downing Street will start winning over right-wing Labour MPs and so on, and create a sort of coalition. It does nonetheless still seem surprising, though, because if Theresa May was the kind of de Gaulle style, far-sighted visionary leader who was going to take a decisive stance for the future of the country and build a political fortune for her party at this moment, what she'd be doing is building a hegemonic coalition across parties. She'd be outflanking Corbyn. She'd be talking to Labour MPs. She'd be doshing out money left and right. I spoke to a Labour advisor last year, and this was the fear. They were going to start doshing out money to Labour MPs. None of it. They've done none of it. I mean, it's incredible that she can't relinquish one single red line. I mean, she just seems to be, whatever other flaws or strengths she may have, incredibly dogmatic. And I think that's she has given us the impression that her bottom line is that she will not do anything to offend, like seriously, grievously offend the ERG group and the right-wing party base. If you remember, she told George Osborne when she was sacking him, you need to get to know your own party better. Well, she's got to know her own party, and it's holding her hostage.
I mean, the strategy is odd because, I mean, people often try and portray Theresa May in this sort of sympathetic way where she is trying to do what's in the national interest in a difficult situation, and she's got lots of people who are unwilling to compromise on either side. But I think there was a clear route for her. I mean, it potentially still exists, although she's expended a lot of political capital at this point, that would have really put the Labour Party in a difficult position, and I think could have probably built her quite a big coalition, which is to say, look, I'm going to stand up to the ERG. I don't really believe that their obsession with striking trade deals with the United States and Donald Trump is that popular among the base. I think people were attracted to the idea of Brexit, but these details about the backstop, this is these extremists who have these sort of weird quirks that they care about that no one else really does.
Yeah.
And if she'd made a serious proposal to the Labour Party and to Labour backbenchers to say, let's basically have some sort of alignment with the single market, let's stay in the customs union, I think she could have potentially rebuilt the Cameron coalition, which was obviously electorally very, very successful. What she seems to have done is said, my top priority is to hold on to UKIP votes. We already know that they don't go for the Tories in huge numbers. Many of the people, why she was so unsuccessful in 2017 was because many of the people who turned out to vote Brexit, who hadn't been voters before, so maybe once in their life, but had been non-voters for a while, didn't switch to the Conservatives. So I don't see what she's playing at. I think by playing a strategy whereby she's desperate to get Jacob Rees-Mogg on side, it does seem like, well, somewhat suicidal for the Tories.
Well, I mean, this is complicated because, of course, I mean, you're right that Cameron's coalition was electorally successful, but it was also incredibly narrow, and it rested upon shifting small numbers of voters in swing constituencies and so on. I mean, Theresa May's electoral coalition is considerably bigger than Cameron's electoral coalition. The other thing to say about it is that for a while, prior to the snap election, it looked as if pursuing was not only a sound strategy, but actually going to be devastating for Labour, because there were a whole series of northern Rust Belt constituencies, West Midlands constituencies, where Labour had been destroying its own base for years, completely neglected, hadn't done anything to protect them against the decline in industry. And the Tories and UKIP had a combined vote in those areas of about 55%, and the polls suggest that they were going to do it. Now, if Labour had not turned out its vote, this is crucial, Labour had to increase its turnout at that election in a way that it hadn't done for years, had to excite and mobilise people. Had it not done so, a lot of those seats would have gone blue. Mansfield was the only one that did, I think. But if you look at the northeast, quite a lot of seats that would have gone. So May had an idea rooted in a kind of red Toryist strategy, which wasn't fundamentally stupid.
But it didn't work. Don't you think it's already been proved? I thought it made sense at the time. I think there was some logic to it, but I think it's already been shown that you can't build that sort of red Tory coalition as the Tory party, because that's not their brand.
Well, you can't deliver those kinds of... I mean, if she was able to deliver red Tory policies, but she can't really offer anything. If she was able to do anything serious about the housing crisis, for example, or, even looking at what we're talking about over Brexit, the failure to offer anything to leave voting constituencies, the failure to offer anything on workers' rights, that just shows how utterly hollow all that red Tory rhetoric really was. Her talking about, if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere, citizenship is about, all of this sort of stuff, and grounding that in the idea of a national working class, as sort of the ordinary people on the streets. If she was serious about that, and one could imagine a right-wing version of sort of working-class nationalism being quite popular in this country, not necessarily having majority of people on board for it, but an electorally viable bloc, she would be talking about some forms of economic leftism, and that just hasn't been on the agenda. So I think that her idea isn't fundamentally stupid, and I think another leadership could pull it off. The problem they have partly is it's the inability to deliver the policies. It's also partly that they now have to compete not with Ed Miliband but with Jeremy Corbyn, right? So if they had to compete with Ed Miliband, and Ed Miliband was running a Blairite policy on welfare, and cracking down on immigration and all the rest of it, they could easily outflank him to the left, on economic stuff. If you remember the 2010 election, the Tories actually took a number of positions deliberately to the left of Labour, and this has been happening for some time.
Which previous,
right? So, as I recall,
it doesn't have to be exhaustive, and that's just an interesting point. So
no, well, as I recall, they were opposed to the privatisation of the post office, for example. And this was something that, if you looked at a series of by-elections in the time before that. They had been staking out these positions, defending certain public's investments, and also opposing some of New Labour's authoritarianism, opposing some of the racism, talking about, David Cameron talking about how we need to get over the Islamophobia. This is before he became a muscular liberal, right? So he was.
I suppose hugging a hoodie was an alternative to ASBOs, was it?
It was. They got rid of ASBOs. And so there was a certain sense in which they were trying to overcome that nasty party legacy. Okay, so it's not impossible that with another Labour leadership, the Tories could outflank them to the right on social and national questions, and to the left on certain narrowly construed economic questions. To the left here is probably a misnomer, but they could defend things like public ownership, and a limited amount of welfare expansion and so on.
And then I suppose in terms of Brexit, that would potentially have looked a deal fairly similar to what we're looking at now, but she would have put more effort into trying to win over some of the Labour MPs that are in Leave seats and the unions. She just seems to have been fairly lazy. She hasn't reached out to anyone, even potential allies.
I think that shows where her priorities are. We've got a Conservative Party that is in electoral numerical terms very strong. They got 40 something percent of the vote. Although I expect that's a lot more fragile than it appears. But in parliamentary terms, incredibly weak and dependent on the DUP. And that's the sort of dilemma that Theresa May's in. But nonetheless, I still don't understand why she has stuck so rigidly to this unavailing strategy of hers. And even her tactics at this point, I mean, true, May has been fairly good at keeping people guessing and sort of playing up her hard Brexit credentials at first and then dropping that very quickly. But who was supposed to be fooled by this supposed concession from the European Union? So, I mean, I think the only thing that's keeping Theresa May where she is, I mean, let's not forget that she's been humiliated several times now. So this was what, I think you said it was the fourth biggest defeat in history for a government. What was the last one? Was it the first or second biggest defeat?
The last one was the first.
The last one was the first. Okay, so
she's had the first and the fourth in a period of 2 months.
Great. So she's setting records. And the only reason she's still in her job quite clearly is A, she's got a certain masochistic streak, and B, her party and a lot of Labour MPs would rather have this train wreck than have Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street.
We're going to get onto those Labour MPs in one moment. First, just to cover what's going to happen in the very short term. So tomorrow there is going to be a vote on whether or not Parliament supports a no deal. The government will be supporting the motion because, as it stands, that is the default position. So May has always argued that she needs no deal as a bargaining chip to negotiate with the EU, even though they've never seemed particularly persuaded by this chip she's keeping so dear to her. That's likely to lose, so it's likely that Parliament will say we don't endorse a no deal. The next day there will be a vote on whether to extend Article 50. That will probably win, I imagine, and then the issue at hand is really on what terms will the European Union give us that extension? Will they just give Theresa May an extra 3 months so she can keep running down the clock again, another 3 months to run down and try and get essentially the same deal through? Or will they demand that they'll only do an extension if, say, it's a year long, so that there's a time for things in British politics to properly change, or with a proviso that there'll be a general election or a referendum, or that she'll reach out for a proper cross-party deal? What do you see happening if as I'm suggesting, and I think you agree, that the MPs vote in this way to extend Article 50? What do you see as the most likely outcome then?
Well, I think the European, is it the European Commission or the European Council that deals with it? I think it's the European Council that...
I think it's always a combination of both, isn't it? I'm not quite sure.
Well, whichever European bureaucracy it is that deals with this, I think that they couldn't really turn it down. And I don't know that they can really impose conditions on it. They might express to Theresa May their preference, as they have in the past, that she should negotiate across parties, that this, whatever exit deal should happen, should have broad cross-party support and therefore have a degree of stability and certainty for businesses and so on. But I don't think they could necessarily impose those as conditionalities. So I think they would probably have to go along with it. Number of reasons for that. First, they don't want a hard Brexit. The European Commission may be quite remote from the mass of the populace, so they don't particularly care if Britain has a recession, and maybe they can live with it if a British recession triggers economic crises in a number of European countries. But the European Council of Ministers is probably a little bit more responsive to those kinds of pressures and don't really want to trigger economic crisis. So I think that just to avoid an obviously unnecessary crashing out, they would concede it. But the difficulty is that without either a referendum or, as I would prefer, a general election, nothing is likely to change. it's just possible that we saw that between these two votes, something like 41 Tory MPs shifted. Maybe it wasn't just Tory MPs, but that's the total number of MPs who shifted.
There's only 3 MPs that voted for the deal this time around, so I think that was potentially even less than last time.
What's that now?
Only 3 Labour MPs voted for May's deal tonight.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I think it was more than 3 last time, but maybe that was just because those MPs have since left the party. I'm not sure.
All right, so let's clarify this right now. How many TIG MPs voted for it?
I'm pretty sure they all voted against, but I'll need to check on the app.
Right, well, that's... I
know that Mike Gapes came out this morning saying they were going to vote against it. I think it would have been pretty bizarre for their brand if they were to vote for this deal at this point.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, they've landed so many own goals. I wouldn't have been surprised. Okay, so we saw that there was some shift between these two votes. It's quite possible that after a further 3 months of just constantly going through the same old stuff over and over again, and arm twisting, and Tory handlers going around talking to MPs and saying, this is your career on the line, this is the party on the line, you better get in line. I think maybe they hope that they will just shift just enough people. I think Stephen Bush estimates that they need 32 more votes. Right.
If they keep coming at this proportion.
They need 32 more votes to swing it.
Oh, I thought when I read that tweet, I thought you meant we're going to have to do this vote 32 more times before the
oh, possibly.
No, I think you're right. That makes far more sense than how I interpreted it earlier. Yeah, I actually think I think you're right. The European Union doesn't have that much to lose by offering a short extension. Peter Mandelson was on the BBC earlier, or Sky, I can't remember which one it was, and he was saying they wouldn't. They either want a promise, a guarantee about a second referendum or a general election, or they'll give us a whole year because that will give time for the People's Vote campaign to get slightly more momentum. Oh, God. But if I was the European Union, I don't know why I'd choose no deal on the 24th of March, or was it the 30th of March, when you could just have a no deal on the 24th of April, which is the other date that's been cited, because that's when the whole European elections start rolling off. So yeah, I imagine an extension, and it's going to be fine for the European Union because they can just say, here's the deal, we'll give you any more window dressing you want, but fundamentally it's going to stay the same.
Yep.
And everyone in Britain is going to have to suffer nights and nights and nights more news where everyone's talking about a backstop that no one actually gives a shit about, which is how we're going to end the discussion on the EU. We're going to talk about Tom Watson and Tig in a moment. First of all, thank you for watching Tisky Sour. Thank you for everyone who donates. You are what makes Novara Media possible. You are the reason we can expand. If you don't already, please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's work a month. I think when I last looked, we had about 1,000 people watching live. Yeah, 1,026. We want that to go up, though. This is a big night in British politics. We should be getting up into the 2,000s. We need 2,000 by the 29th of March. That's a random target I'm setting myself today. Fairly challenging. Also, please like this video. That means it appears in more people's news feed. Tweet it, share it, whatever. As ever, we love your comments. We'll get to questions in probably about 20 minutes. So let's go into the Labour Party. Mm-hmm. Again, potentially an extraordinary moment that was somewhat predictable. So the deputy leader of a party, Tom Watson, last night had a meeting of 160 MPs and Lords to discuss the launch of a new group which is called the Future Britain Group, to gather Social Democrat MPs and Democratic Socialist MPs. I'm pretty sure that in that room of 160 Lords and MPs, no one before that evening had called themselves a Democratic Socialist. I understand the first person to speak was Peter Mandelson, who I'm not sure under what understanding of either of those terms he fits into that category, but there we are. And they are going to discuss policy. So, I mean, well, that's the official explanation is they're going to discuss policy so that the party can be more inclusive of its broad church. I mean, I'll explain in a moment why I don't particularly buy that. I'm sure the audience can guess. But first of all, what do you think is going on? What is Tom Watson playing at?
they've had several years to come up with some policy differences with Jeremy Corbyn. They had the Owen Smith leadership election campaign, during which they didn't dare articulate policy differences with Jeremy Corbyn. They didn't dare come up with policy differences during the snap election. They thought that by leaking the manifesto, they were going to, mock the Corbyn's policies and just show up what an extremist he was. Turns out they were rather popular, so after that, they haven't been able to articulate any policy disagreements. Look, I think we should be very wary of anything that suggests overestimating Tom Watson's abilities. He was good in his time, as Morrissey sang. He was a very adept parliamentary manoeuvrer and wrangler. He was good at twisting arms. He engineered the downfall of Tony Blair. We can't,
we can't thank him enough for that.
Right, exactly. He did the right thing. Obviously, not necessarily for the right reasons. But, he ensured that Blair stepped down when he was becoming, a liability. But he's had always that very narrow repertoire of backstage manoeuvrings. And politically, his strategy has become a disaster. So, of course, we know that historically he positions himself on the right wing of New Labour. So, what I mean by that, I suppose I should say, he positions himself on the authoritarian nationalist wing, right? Not the cosmopolitan, open-ended, sort of internationalist wing. And not particularly socially liberal either. So, when he was running Liam Byrne's campaign, they defined themselves mainly by running against the Lib Dem and portraying the Lib Dem as drips who were soft on asylum seekers, soft on drugs, soft on teen gangs, soft on immigrants.
So this was in the Hodge Hill by-election in 2004. The campaign leaflet read, "Labour is on your side. The Lib Dems are on the side of failed asylum seekers."
Yeah.
He later took responsibility for that very leaflet. He sort of apologised, but I mean...
Well, to be fair, he never stopped. I mean, look at his involvement in Sean Simon's West Midlands mayoral campaign. Catastrophic mayoral campaign. I mean, Labour should have walked that election, and they lost to a dismal Tory. And Sean Simons is, a bit of an idiot, and always has been. He was back in the day when he was, I think, some sort of student activist, Blairite. But he ran on the basis of take back control, the Brexit slogan, and everything. It was the whole literature was designed on a Brexit basis. I think Watson also had some involvement in the pretty awful Stoke by-election campaign, where it was run with the English nationalist motifs, and we're gonna bring back the mills and go back to the way it used to be before all those people came over. So, obviously that was insinuated. They didn't actually say that. But so I think Watson is an adherent of a political strategy that has been shown to fail time after time, and in fact has contributed quite significantly to Labour's serious electoral decline after 1997. Okay, in the aftermath of the snap election, Tom Watson was one of the few people to put his neck out, along with Gloria De Piero and Phil Wilson, a few others. And the interesting thing about all these people is that though they don't come from different wings of New Labour, so Phil Wilson is a leader of Open Britain, so it's a Remain coalition, but Phil Wilson is also a Blairite who wants to get tough on immigration. Yeah. So it's one of these things where, it's non-EU immigration that's the problem, that kind of thing.
He also writes, I remember after the 2017 general election, he had a fairly poorly researched piece which said that Labour have abandoned the working class because he was looking at those constituents that have the traditional white working class in them, completely ignoring and invisibilising anyone who are on low incomes living in cities. Well, so in response to that, I remember looking up where, because that was based on where Labour did the worst was in seats with the highest white working class or traditional working class in a sort of Goldthorpe sense seats. But if you actually looked it up, the 20 seats with the most, I think, kids on free school meals, about 18 of them voted Labour. So it's a really warped view of class, which means that you you say Labour is meant to serve the traditional working class, and if we get votes from black and brown people in cities, that's kind of incidental.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, also, I think this definition of class is just awful. It's rooted in a kind of culturalist nostalgia. It has nothing to do with any sociologically realistic definition of class relations. But that beside the point. I mean, I was about to refer to the article that you're just describing because it was one of a series by Watson, Piero, and a few others. And they all represented a socially and nationally conservative response to Corbynism. And basically the argument was, crucially, now that we've had this stunning success, thanks to Jeremy Corbyn, we feel that we now need to broaden our appeal and slightly modify our agenda so that we can reach out to the C2s, who... slightly semi-skilled working class voters, according to this schema, based in small towns and suburbs and so on. And the argument was that the reason why they hadn't been won over was because Labour was too lefty on things like national security and immigration, so it needed to wave the flag more. So this is what I think Tom Watson wants. In terms of his actual concrete politics, that doesn't mean that that's the same as what he can actually deliver in terms of a Labour leadership and so on. But I think that would be clearly what he would be pushing. What he wants, obviously, is to provide some sort of organised framework in which the currently marginal but nonetheless powerful forces of the Labour right can develop some sort of common sense among themselves, because I think they know that they can't get rid of Corbyn in the here and now, but I think they also know that nothing is guaranteed in politics, and some years of pressure and attrition, and maybe some disaffection over Brexit or some other issue will start to open up some of the pro-Corbyn membership to more right-wing arguments.
So you think it's about winning over the membership to some degree?
Well, look, historically, Labour right's never been particularly good at working with the membership. So, for example, the Labour right in the 1980s almost exclusively worked through the union bureaucracy and the parliamentary groups, until eventually they realised they needed to reach out to the union, student union branches, they needed to reach out to constituency branches and so on. But to be honest, demoralisation did a lot of their work for them, so that when they finally did get around to talking to the members, they had Thatcher to thank for winning the members over for them. And I guess that, but I think they do want to talk to the members. I just think they can't help aggrandizing, first of all, aggrandizing their traditional concerns and obsessions, but also aggravating, the average member. It's kind of gratuitous, the way that Tom Watson intervenes. For example, that a videoed statement he made. There were many odd things about that, but the oddest thing I thought was that his whining about identity politics. I mean, he was talking about a split that occurred, which, according to him and others, was motivated in large part by Brexit and racism, anti-Semitism. And he's complaining that identity politics has caused all this anti-Semitism. Is that what he means? What does he mean? Does anybody know what he means?
Yeah, when I read, there was the very dark reading of it, potentially true, which is that it's that the reason there's an anti-Semitism problem is because people have sided with Muslims. I mean, that was what some people were saying on Twitter. I don't know if that's what you should read into it. I mean, the other idea is that one of the reasons for the level of the degree of hostility within Labour, because a lot of this is about civility, right? It's that people are taking politics somewhat too seriously and getting too angry at their MPs, is because people are dogmatically wedded to to their faction in the party. So to Corbynism, I'm a Corbynite and everyone else is evil, I suppose. It's potentially what he's pointing to. I don't know. I don't want to put myself in his shoes. I mean, in a way, I think by talking about his ideas, we're giving him too much credit. Tom Watson has never appeared to me as an ideas man. And I think what's interesting about this grouping he's made is that he's trying to position it as a sort of talking shop for Labour MPs on the backbenches to start to pull their weight and to start to move Labour policy in a particular direction. But they still haven't come up with any particular idea. So the one thing they say is, look, we back all the economics. This is obviously TIG, the independent group, have gone down a bit of a more sort of Blairite, New Labour-y, we don't want to nationalise stuff. But Tom Watson, they've said, we're basically fine with the economics. We're going to say some sort of buzzwords about a new digital economy, even though, I mean, I'm sure there's no sort of factional barrier to them doing that within the approved mechanisms. In fact, it's been Tom Watson's job for the last 3 years and he hasn't done anything. But besides, moving on from that, they've said it's about foreign policy. Because what they've tried to see as a wedge issue basically between Corbyn and the electorate is the idea that everyone now loves Corbyn's economics, but his foreign policy is a bit wacky, a bit anti-NATO, a bit anti-nuclear. And so we're going to shift the Labour Party in that direction. The problem is, Corbyn's already conceded on all of those things. So, I mean, are they going to be a lobbying group for Trident? Because we're already pro-Trident. Are they going to be a lobbying group for staying in NATO? Because we're already staying in NATO. I mean, it's as if they're pitching themselves against the Labour Party from 1983 because they think that some people in the leadership might share those attitudes. But when the people who potentially are a bit anti-NATO and are a bit nuclear, which is some of the people in Corbyn's office, probably Corbyn himself, they haven't tried to assert that over the party. So the one area they've decided to battle on, or where they're pretending to battle Tom Watson et al., is an issue on which they've already won. I mean, I think what is going on, I don't think this is about ideas, and I think it makes sense, I think it's relatively smart, is that they recognise that the one place they have in the Labour Party with some power is on the parliamentary benches. They recognise that because they've all sort of had their tails in between their legs since 2017, they haven't really utilised the bargaining power, the leverage they have from that position as they could have done. I think Tom Watson has recognised that if they unite, if they sort of, as we know on the left, the workers united, I mean, they're not really workers, but, people united have more influence. And I think what he's trying to do is gather about 80 MPs who can say, if you don't do X, Y, Z, we'll leave. And the alternative to doing that is them just sort of waiting to individually get picked off. Some of them get picked off in deselection. Some of them know they're never going to get a promotion. And I think what he's saying is, instead of us getting picked off one by one and melting into irrelevance, let's go out with a big bang, all 80 of us, unless we can wrestle some control back from the party. So I think we'll see an ultimatum at some point to John McDonnell, to Jeremy Corbyn, to say, I mean, the ultimatum could be something like call off deselections. It could be something like put XYZ person into the shadow cabinet, or all 80 of us will go at the same time, and that would be damaging. I mean, I think we have to look at it as a build-up to coup 2.0. I don't think it's about ideas at all.
I think ultimately it is about ideas. It has to be, because that's what they object to in Corbynism. They object to Corbynism precisely. I mean, they claim not to oppose the economics. They do oppose it. They're flatly, utterly opposed to it. They're also opposed to the whole foreign policy framework. It's not just about Trident. It's not just about NATO. There's a whole series of orientations. The fact that Jeremy Corbyn would prioritise support for Palestinians, for example, the fact that he wouldn't see it as his job to demonize Hamas and make that the major issue when civilians have just been shot up by Israeli troops, I think they see that as a problem. And the fact that he has a history as a left-wing foreign policy advocate, that's his major sort of historical focus. I think they see it as a problem. And also, just because Corbyn has conceded on a number of issues now, doesn't mean that those issues won't be won at some point. The membership is pretty clearly moving to the left. I mean, it started off with a membership that was overwhelmingly not politically formed, but was interested in left-wing ideas, looking to the left for leadership. The last few years has been a period of rapid pedagogy. It's been a period of it's been a steep learning curve. in which lots and lots of members have come by new ideas very, very quickly. Some of those ideas obviously are like alt-left stuff, not very helpful, and some of it is, much more serious and much more sustained. I was impressed, actually, when I visited the Labour Party conference 2017, talking to members, just how strategically thoughtful they were, and how much they were dug in for long fights, And this was at a moment when you would have expected triumphalism and so on, but there was actually a bit more sobriety. So I think that there's been a learning curve, and I think that the members aren't going to be easily dislodged from their position of current influence, and the MPs have to fear that even such concessions as they have won thus far are in danger if they don't defend them. But I mean, where I will agree with you in terms of the ideas is that in the short term, I think I was waiting to hear what you thought they would demand in terms of policy. Of course, it's not policy. It's usually something to do with the branches, or suspend X number of branches or call off deselections. All of that sounds totally plausible to me, and it gives away the game because although their whole raison d'etre at the moment is to stop Corbynism, because it's actually quite weird the degree to which it's almost phobic, because they would put up with a lot of things they don't agree with, but there's just something about Corbynism that they're phobic of. For all that they are invested in that, I think underlying that there's also another dimension which was very clear during the 2016 chicken coup, which was outrage. Outrage that the members imposed upon them a leader that they didn't like, they didn't agree with, they couldn't live with. And they historically had never had to put up with that. They historically have always run the party. In the history of Labour Party, just potted history really, Labour Party management was divided up between the unions who supplied the bloc votes and the industrial muscle, and the parliamentary party who decided policy with the union bloc votes backing them up. The unions almost always supported the right or centre candidate, never a candidate of the left. And the constituency activists were completely frozen out of any serious influence. I mean, one can overstate this because they did get some victories, but by and large, they were kept out of a real direct control of policy making and so on. That's no longer the case. I mean, obviously, Labour remains a complex pluralist party in which the MPs still have a lot of power, a lot of clout, and in which there are various sort of groups of political professionals in the party and various bureaucracies that make a lot of decisions. But the members did have an important say at the last conference, and they did set some policies. That's not insignificant. So I think you're right. It's maybe we could say that it's a combination of, it's not so much the ideas themselves as it's a combination of a certain ideological aversions and a sense of entitlement to rule.
Yeah, I think potentially what I was saying is, I think their opposition to Corbyn is somewhat down to his ideas, but I think they've tried to present themselves as the challenge they're going to present to Corbyn is a challenge of ideas.
Yeah. And
that won't work because they're basically arguing with Seamus Milne pieces in The Guardian from 2014.
Yes.
They're not arguing with current Labour policy. So it's an issue that doesn't really have much salience whether or not we're going to stay in NATO, considering that's already party policy, even though I'm sure that their suspicion that Corbyn wants us to leave NATO is one reason why they're committed to doing anything in their power to stopping him becoming Prime Minister, which I think is what's motivating Tom Watson.
What's kind of interesting, they've really struggled for, as you call it, a wedge issue. So Brexit is one, but of course Tom Watson and his ilk can't go down that road because they kind of agree with Corbyn on Brexit as much as they don't want to. And they may even wish that he was a bit firmer in his commitment to Brexit. The other, obviously, is Labour anti-Semitism, which I think, it's as ugly as that is, it's not going to be the wedge issue for most voters. And then what was the other thing? Venezuela. You know, this was Chris, what's his name? Chris Leslie. This idiot who thinks that everything is communism, and thinks that Labour Party policy is a Marxist policy now, and that supporting the Chavez government, having supported the Chavez experiment, makes one a communist, and so on. Who's going to buy that? Who's really that interested in that? I mean, insofar as people are interested, I would think there's about as many people sympathetic to Chavismo as outright opposed. You know, in London, the only thing that most people would have to remember about Chavismo is that it was a deal between Livingston and Chavez that got the fares down, the bus fares down to about £1. That's fossil social democracy for you.
I suppose they've got two wedge issues in a moment, in a way, haven't they? So I think they've got one. Well, Tom Watson doesn't, but Tig did. So there was one wedge issue between the Labour leadership and the electorate, which was Brexit. I think Tig leaving and us sort of modifying our position slightly has somewhat healed that wedge, as it were. And there's a wedge issue within the membership, which is anti-Semitism, which is obviously causing lots of upset and discord, because that is a way that you can, I suppose, as it were, even though, as I've said on Twitter for the last 2 weeks or whatever, I think there are real problems going on. Why it serves the interests of Tig or Tom Watson or whatever, which doesn't mean they invented it, is that it sort of demobilises, it upsets, it makes the base feel like they've got a certain degree of self-doubt, and it also means that people have an excuse of moral high ground to leave, which isn't to say it's all created so as to give
I don't think you need to keep saying
high
that.
Ground. Well, I do, because I know that the Red Raw always watch this, and they always clip us out of context. So I have to make sure that every 30 seconds I'm saying something that means they can't take it out of context and put it on Twitter, because I can't be bothered.
Can I just say fuck Red Roar?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
Let's take some questions as we go. So put some questions in the comments while they're appearing. The membership, that was something that came up a lot. So I suppose something that both Tig and Tom Watson have tried to say publicly is our disagreement with Corbynism is the ideas. So for Chukwuemeka, it's been that we're interested in evidence-based ideas, not dogmatic ideas. For Tom Watson, it's sort of like they're not patriotic enough, or they're not committed to the... I mean, it's very unclear with Tom Watson. But anyway, he's definitely publicly pitched it as this is about ideas. And I think one of the things that's come up in this conversation is it's actually about the members. So what both of these groups were pissed off at is the idea that they would have to be accountable to activists who could potentially threaten their career prospects by deselecting them at some point, or would potentially make them act in a way which... I mean, I think a lot of these people basically want to serve the establishment, right, to some degree. They don't want to be accountable to a bunch of 500 activists in their constituency. And I suppose what this brings up is where you think the Labour Party membership is at this point. If one key requirement of the success of Corbynism is to maintain a healthy relationship, as it were, between the leadership and the membership and the electorate, I think that matters as well. Where do you think we stand there?
I mean, as far as I can tell, Corbyn's position with regard to the members has barely shifted, if at all. And I think that were they, and they know this is why they're not going for Corbyn now, were they to do so, they would lose a lot of they would provoke such a backlash among the members. The danger of pushing ahead with all the anti-Semitism stuff is that while, of course, you know, we can make the caveat, as always, that there are real examples of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. There's not more anti-Semitism in Labour than in any other party. And it certainly isn't, in my opinion, institutionally or pervasively anti-Semitic, but there are examples of anti-Semitism. The problem is that by pushing at the idea that the members are ubiquitously anti-Semitic, and by treating people, like including a lot of Jewish activists as if they are equivalent to BNP members, they are generating a backlash. I mean, I think this is very visible. And that backlash will, it might have some ugly elements to it, we don't know. But I think that it will not be very forgiving of MPs who participate in that. And some of those MPs probably, I figure they're on their way out. It's their swan song anyway, so why not do some damage on the way down? And the difficulty here for Corbyn and John McDonnell and all the rest of them is, how do they maintain a reasonably sensible position on anti-Semitism, which, from their perspective, has to involve appearing sober, taking it seriously, continuing to, make heartfelt pleas to the Jewish community, to every Jewish organization. We will talk to you. Tell us what you want. Let's negotiate, etc., etc. And at the same time, not be complicit in the misleading, what you might call lying by emphasis. In other words, by the constant coverage of these relatively small number of cases, and by constantly zeroing in on these details, and then Labour's leadership by constantly talking about it and simpering and pleading, that they're taking it very, very seriously and they're doing all they can, they run the risk, of course, of colluding in that, misrepresentation by means of emphasis. So that places them in a very difficult position, because if they do that, and if they fail to defend the members from some of the slanders and smears that are coming from the press, then of course what's going to happen is they're going to lose a lot of members, and a lot of those members might go off in, who knows what directions. So obviously, this is a very difficult issue, and one that they, sort of opponents of Corbyn within the parliamentary party, at least the more Machiavellian among them, like to, prod and use and instrumentalize in order to, create divisions among the base. My sense is that because there isn't a massive amount in this electorally, because it is unlikely to seriously, either way, change the Labour share of the vote in an election, I think it would be quite feasible for Labour to approach the issue on its own merits. In other words, to take it seriously as a political issue, to treat anti-Semitism as part of the broader problem of racism, not as something separate or special, but as part of a broader problem in which, Labour and the left are not separate from the rest of society. We are as exposed to and part of reproducing racism as anybody else. And I think that they can afford to say a bit more strongly and a bit more loudly, nonetheless, Labour is not more anti-Semitic than anybody else, and those who are saying so are speaking falsely, and in some cases speaking directly disingenuously.
Yeah, I think we somewhat disagree in emphasis on this. I agree that it's been taken out of proportion, often with very cynical motivations. I think there was a very small number of anti-Semites in the party when Corbyn came to power. There were a very small number of anti-Semites on sections of the pro-Palestinian left, very small. I think to smear the far left or the pro-Palestinian movement as generally anti-Semitic is awfully offensive. But I think those were honed in on by Corbyn's opponents.
Yeah.
They did exist.
Yeah.
And I do think the party was too slow at getting a hold of them. Which and the effect of that, and so we have seen that in evidence of sort of leaked emails and stuff. I know people can complain about it, it's not very professional to leak emails, but whatever. You have seen the party been very slow to nip this in the bud. Yeah. And what you should have done to show leadership is to say, look, we know it's very small, but we also know we're going to be held to a very high standard on this. Mm-hmm. And I think because the party hasn't been quick enough to nip it in the bud where it does occur, what we've seen is a row to be allowed to develop, and now you see a backlash. And I think that backlash which you're seeing from members, and which is completely understandable. I think some of the people who suffer from that, as well as it being pretty distressing for members to be constantly called anti-Semites, but the way that generates a sort of proactive backlash, I think, can make the party feel somewhat hostile to Jewish people. And I don't think that's because the left is intrinsically anti-Semitic. I think that's because there's been a backlash and there hasn't been enough leadership shown to say what is going on, what is anti-Semitism, what is not, and basically to get the membership on safe ground. And you get the membership on safe ground by saying, like, look, stop being so reactive. One, if you see someone doing XYZ, call it out. That's completely unacceptable. Two, if someone calls you XYZ, often if you sort of lash out in your reply, that's going to make the situation worse. So talk about what you care about. If you think this is about Palestine, and to some degree it is, talk about Palestine. You know, it's not, it's, one, it can cause sort of like harm, but also it's not safe ground to be talking about Israel lobbies or whatever. Just if what you care about is Palestine, talk about Palestine. If what you care about is the welfare state and the NHS, talk about that. If you let yourself be drawn into sort of discussions where you're passing motions about there is this much anti-Semitism or that much anti-Semitism, or if you're sort of like standing up in rooms sort of saying, there isn't an anti-Semitism problem, big round of applause, when some people feel like there's a backlash. I just feel like the leadership should do more, one, to nip it in the bud where it exists, and two, to get the membership on safe ground. And until we do that, it's difficult to go for the tactic, which I feel like you're saying, which is to say, look, this is basically pretty trumped up. And there's no specific anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party.
No, I mean, in terms of anti-Semitism, I agree to some extent with the analysis of Barnaby Rain and others, which is that the dominant form of anti-Semitism today involves construing Jewish people essentially as a vanguard of Western modernity in Palestine. And using Jewish people as a human shield to defend foreign policy, to defend capitalism. And we saw this during the Iraq War. If you oppose the Iraq War, you're anti-Semitic. We've seen it in the way that people talk about Israel. If you're opposed to Israel, you're anti-Semitic. As if all Jewish people agree on Israel. As if, and in this country, we had the most extraordinary thing where there was a Holocaust denier who was being wildly smeared by the newspapers. Sorry, forgive me. I meant to say a Holocaust survivor, obviously, Haj Omer, who was being wildly smeared by the press and so on, as though he were, in some sense, equivalent to a Holocaust denier. So I think that there are very important forms of anti-Semitism that are very pervasive and that are linked to political power. In other words, they're not just subaltern forms of consciousness. And they need to be militantly opposed. Unfortunately, we haven't really caught up with that argument in this country. To some extent, that argument is being had more successfully in the United States. Because, of course, in the United States, there's a lot of young Jewish leftist groups who really don't have that much time for Israel and don't have much time for being used as a human shield for other people's crimes.
Well, I suppose the difference there, and I think the differences between the Democratic Party and the Labour Party are very interesting in the respect with how they've dealt with this. I mean, we've discussed this on Twitter. I think one reason, yes, is that you had a very large Jewish left that was not pro-Israel and was well organised and sort of could come to the defence of Ilhan Omar, which was where the controversy sort of erupted. I think also Ilhan Omar was very good at getting on what I call safe ground. So she was talking about Israel-Palestine directly the whole time. She wasn't talking about financing the slave trade. She wasn't talking about sort of control of XYZ. She wasn't talking about Hitler and Zionism like Ken Livingstone. She was talking about a topic which was necessary to talk about, which is Israel-Palestine, and she got attacked for that. And it was very easy for everyone to unite around her and say, look, this is actually about Palestine, because in that situation it was. Whereas what Labour have allowed themselves to be sucked into is a load of conversations that aren't actually about Israel-Palestine, because we've had people say completely unhelpful, unnecessary, insensitive things that don't take the conversation in an interesting or useful direction at all. So I think the American left have been much more disciplined than our left, but they don't have a membership party, so it's harder.
Well, there is that. I mean, I tend to agree with you on the issue of, for example, what Ken Livingstone said, which was, tactically possibly a worse thing to say at that particular moment, and wasn't particularly, it wasn't accurate in the way that he said it. And it was a loose cannon kind of intervention. And those kinds of intervention, I think we should think about more clearly. But I do want to register a distinction between that which is politically helpful and safe ground, and that with which you should have absolute freedom to discuss. So I don't think, contrary to some of the sort of false reports of Labour. Remember we were told that Labour allegedly discussed whether it was okay to have Holocaust denial. No, Holocaust denial is not okay. And I don't think, I don't buy any free speech argument on that issue. But I think that there's a lot of stuff that is not safe ground, that especially if you're Jewish, for example, and you want to talk about, the Havara agreement or whatever, or any of these issues, that should be your right. And really, I fear the problem here is we haven't developed the political culture that is capable of having a certain degree of sophistication about these issues and protecting those rights. And, obviously, above all, I'm concerned that Palestinians, including Palestinians in the UK, would have the right to articulate their oppression as they see it, because historically the British left at its best has always been internationalist and has always been led by, for example, South African migrants in the anti-apartheid movement. So, I mean, that's really who we want to be taking our leadership from. So yes, I agree with you. We do need a certain degree of political clarity, and we need people to stop behaving like idiots and making loose cannon interventions, and sometimes saying things that I think go quite close to the, that are just pushing it, sailing close to the wind, as it were. We need to end that. Sorry, I fear I'm using up a lot of time. You wanted to talk about something else, probably.
No, the reason I'm always at this point, I'm sort of half looking at the questions and half listening to your answer. It's two things at once, very difficult for me. Let's change the subject though. There's some other sort of like big expansive questions in here. This isn't going to be very controversial, but maybe interesting. Should the Green Jobs Revolution be at the core of a Labour general election campaign / manifesto? I'd be surprised if you say no.
I mean, not only does it have to be at the core, it will probably be a doorstep issue by 2022 or something. Look, we've got a situation today where just in the last week, we've discovered that another 60 harvests and the topsoil won't be able to support enough food growing to feed the planet. Well, why is that? It's because of intensive agriculture. We've learned that the rate of insect biomass depletion is massively increased in recent years. We've learned that the rate of death from pollution is double what we thought it was, and so on. There's a whole series of issues here. Now, we can't just have a Green New Deal and then everything will be okay, because it's not a solution, or rather, it's not a problem that avails itself of simply technical solutions backed up by sufficient redistributions of wealth. We're talking about major disruption to the whole economic system of value production if we're going to get rid of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have a politically privileged position, but they also have an economically central position, a whole series of dependent industries and so on and so forth. On top of that, we'd also have to be talking about rolling back the current food industry, because that's responsible for a huge amount of emissions. It's responsible for a lot of extinctions, and of course those extinctions are one of the major reasons why we may not be able to feed ourselves in the future. So it seems to me that, if anything, Labour needs to up its game on climate and to become a little bit more utopian even on this issue, not just green jobs. I think it's a shame that the last time they were seriously tested on this issue, Corbyn and MacDonald took the right position on Heathrow, because you can't expand aviation and aim for zero net emissions. So it's a shame that a lot of Labour MPs and the Unite Union took exactly the wrong position. They are living in denial. But this will be an increasingly big issue in the next few years.
All right, final question. I'm going to do the thing where I ask a question someone's asked and then modify it. So this is from RJ. How would we transfer from Corbyn McDonald's economy to full socialism? How I want to sort of relate that to the topic of conversation is Tom Watson and both the Independent Group or whatever, or Tom Watson more, has been sort of saying we are the Social Democratic Group. We are the Social Democrat Group. Mm-hmm. One response to that is to say, look, this would often what I say, to be honest. And what I think is that, look, Labour's manifesto basically is social democratic, so I'm not sure what space you're trying to eke out. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you to what degree you think Corbyn and McDonald's manifesto is something other than social democracy. Whether it should be, what would that look like?
I think that there are elements of Corbynism that are about devolving power to the grassroots as much as possible, locally owned cooperatives. I think some of the most interesting ideas were in that document about different forms of ownership. And I think that that's possibly the basis for some form of grassroots mobilization whereby you could imagine the material and social infrastructure of a future non-capitalist society, at least. I don't want to overstate this. I think that it might give people a sense of what a future social society might look like, and it might give people some practice in running aspects of life that they're not used to running. But to be honest, the big problem with Corbynism at the moment is that the majority of Corbynites are relatively passive, except on social media, of course. They're not involved in trade unions. They're not, leading industrial action or any of that stuff. Actually, the rate of industrial action's historically low. The rate of unionization's historically low. There's a fairly big party membership, but most of that membership is not directly politically active, except when the leadership is threatened, which is not nothing. But there is a need for people to get experience in running things, doing things, being active for themselves. And one of the things about bourgeois politics in general, and neoliberal politics in particular, is that it gets you out of the habit of having any power or say in your own life.
Excellent. I think we should devote a whole show to social democracy versus democratic socialism soon. I think you'd have some good interventions there, but that could go on all night. So Richard Seymour, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a very interesting discussion. Thank you for watching as ever. You know what I'm going to say. Navarro Media is only possible because of your very kind donations. So we can keep expanding. So we can make these shows more often, potentially. I mean, you've already got many more Ash Sarkar and Aaron Bastani videos this year than you did last year, and that is because of your fundraising work. If you already donate, thank you. If you don't, please go to support.navarromedia.com. As you know, we ask for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. As ever, like this video. It means it appears in more people's news feeds. Share it on Twitter. Share it on Facebook. Thank you for watching. This was Tiski Sauer. We are Navarro Media. Good night.